Well, hello everyone. Mike Falkenstine here with 1A Catalyst. I want to be the first one to welcome you to this latest episode of Missions Talk. And I'm here again with my co-host, Steve Schirmer. And Steve, we took a little break in the summer from these, and it was nice having the break, but it's also nice to be back. And
Yeah, we needed a break. I needed a break mentally just to decompress, and even did that on our Silk Road Catalyst YouTube channel, just taking a break from those videos as well. But yeah, it's good to finally be back, and we definitely have a semi-heavy subject. It's definitely a current subject, whereas typically we talk
right.
about just general missions related stuff, but we're actually diving into a current subject in the news. So yeah,
Yeah,
we're
that's right.
starting off with that.
That's right. And so in this episode, yeah, you've been the one that has done more of this reading and research about the Afghanistan refugee crisis, and I think we're going to kind of mold that into talking about refugees generally and giving people some information. And yeah, just seeing the pictures and the video that we're seeing, it's a heavy subject, isn't it?
It is. And yeah, I've definitely done a lot of look into it. Prior to this summer, kind of the Middle East and that area of the world really wasn't on my priority list at the moment, but definitely got turned that around for some reason. But it's been exciting, but it's also been heart-wrenching to see what's going on and to hear from people directly, what's happening. So yeah,
That's
we're
right.
ready to talk about it today.
Yeah. So, Steve, maybe we should sort of clear the deck a little and mention that we're really not going kind of the political side of this Afghanistan issue, right?
Correct. Correct.
You and I were just talking a little bit about that. That's not really our purpose. Really, it's to highlight these refugees and kind of their plight and kind of how we can be praying and serving them. So maybe, Steve, we should just start off by kind of highlighting the situation of in Afghanistan and, of these Afghan refugees. So kind of highlight the situation for us.
Yeah, so like you said, we don't want to dive into the political side of it. I
Mm-hmm.
think everyone gets enough of that. They can watch
Definitely.
that if they want. But as I started, there was a point in the crisis where someone had mentioned, and I'm not going to say the name of any countries that border the country. I mean, you can look at the number of countries that border Afghanistan, but I'm not going to be specific in terms of the people I'm talking about. But there was one tweet or something I read that had to do with Afghans flowing into their country. And it was that tweet that got my attention for some reason, outside of just all the other things we were watching and observing in the news. So I started looking into it. I started reading up more on it, started looking into the situation with Christians, as things they're going through in the country. And then, I started talking with people I could as close to the area, as close to Afghanistan as I could to get their assessment. And, and I mentioned this before we even got on today, that something I read this morning from the BBC, which I didn't even know this till today, is that there were 2.2 million Afghan refugees living in bordering countries pre-current crisis. I mean, this was
Wow.
already an existing situation. And I
Okay.
believe it, because when I was talking to people in one of these countries, they were talking about the Afghans that were in their country that had been there a long time, and not just in the past month or two. And then in the same article, they were talking about I have it written down here, 3.5 million Afghans in Afghanistan, around the border, along the whole border of Afghanistan, trying to flee the country, according to
Wow.
this BBC article. So,
Wow.
the situation is really, in some respects, dire. Is definitely a crisis, because as the former government that just was beaten or escaped or whatever various things with
Yeah,
their
right.
president fleeing, I think to
Evacuated.
Tajikistan or
Yeah.
Uzbekistan, one of those countries. And so you have the government fleeing or leaving or giving up. You had basically the Taliban regaining control. A lot of people were just afraid. There's, some perspective. Someone was written, an article I read was pointing out that people 20 years and younger, and you could probably maybe even go 21, 22 in terms of a memory. But if you can imagine people years old, they've never lived under Taliban rule. They have no idea what it's like. All they know is what they've heard from, before
Yeah. Older
2001.
people. Hmm.
Yeah, so there's a whole younger generation that has no idea what life was like by experience under the Taliban, and and a lot of them want to get out, and there's a lot of
Right.
fear. So it's really created a mess. We've got Afghans arriving in the U.S. In the last week or two, I think in Virginia and Washington and places like that to be processed to go to other places. There's Bob Roberts Jr. He's a
Mm.
pastor out of Fort Worth, Texas, or he was Northwood Church, I think. Forgive me if I mispronounced it, but I think that's his church up in Keller, Texas. He's got his church involved, and there's a whole group of people in the DFW area that have come together to receive. They're already preparing cars and housing and all kinds of care
Wow.
packages for the Afghans that they've been told are coming to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I think there's a place in maybe Denver or somewhere in Colorado that I heard
Mm.
was preparing to receive
Nice.
some in multiple cities around the. Sadly, they're not coming to where I'm at. I wish they were. We have a refugee settlement program here, so I'm hoping that eventually some will come here so we can get involved personally. But
Right.
I mean, and even just the things we've seen, I think the figure I read today, 80 to 90,000 people have been airlifted, predominantly Afghans, in the past month. And just apart from people fleeing across the border,
Mm.
I mean, anyways, I could go on about it. And I think we all get the gist of it. But, but yeah, the crisis is real. And we definitely want to talk about how we need to respond. At the end, we're going to talk about how you and I think we as believers should be responding. And
All right.
so, yeah, I guess there's the overview or 36,000 foot
Oh,
view
great.
of what's
Well,
transpiring.
Steve, as I've been thinking about this, I was thinking the other day, because, for us in the West, it's just hard for us to even think about being it. What is it like to be a refugee, right? And I think, where I live here in South Metro Denver, just the situation that would have to take place for me to leave my house and flee, right? I mean, it's like almost something we can't actually really know what that's like or understand, because you think about how bad things would have to get to to leave. And so this refugee crisis we have worldwide is not just Afghans, right? This is a global refugee crisis. And I want to talk to us about a little bit about people are refugees, kind of why are they refugees? Because again, I think for me and probably most of us that are, most of our viewers cannot even sort of comprehend what that would be like.
Yeah, so let me start with who they are, where they are, and how many there are, just because that's really quick. So, according to World Relief in their website, there's over 80 million refugees and displaced people. So, a refugee would definitely be outside the country. Displaced, you can actually be similar to a refugee, just called displaced internally in your country, which basically is the same thing, because you're having to leave your home, your livelihood, and start over somewhere else. For various reasons, or you're stuck in your country and you can't get out. So you're really more displaced and not classified as a refugee, from my understanding of
Okay.
those two definitions. But they're inherently the same group of people. So over 80 million, 44,000 people a day become displaced and refugees every single day. And
Wow.
that probably
That's a lot of
numbers
people.
been elevated with the Afghan crisis. One person I talked to in one country was telling me there's thousands crossing the border every day, literally just trying to escape. So that number is probably a bit elevated for the time being. So over 80 million
Oh,
globally, 44,000
right.
new ones a day. The vast majority, what people don't understand, especially here in North America, is that only 16% actually come to what's considered a wealthy country like the United States, Canada, European countries, Australia. Only 16% actually end up in places like this. The
Okay.
vast majority of refugees end up in neighboring countries around their home
Mhm.
country. And,
Okay.
and so when we say things like, why isn't this country helping or that country helping? Well, the reality is we're only helping a small percentage. And the vast majority are being helped by neighboring countries from whatever country. That could be in South America. They're fleeing a certain country in South America, and they're in a neighboring country. They're not necessarily here. So,
Okay.
and their lifestyle is definitely different from ours. And we have to separate, I think, two groups. So those who end up where we live are much
Hmm.
better off than someone who ends up in a neighboring country of Afghanistan.
That's right.
We
Yeah,
have a
that's
lot of
right.
programs, nonprofits, people who are helping. There is government help, but you know what? They need help at first, but the vast majority of them don't want our help long term. They want to provide for their own kids, their own family, their own spouses.
That's
They
right.
want to
Get a
put,
job and yeah.
exactly, they want to put food on the table. They don't want you putting food on their table. They want to buy
All right.
presents for their kids. They don't want to rely on you to buy presents for their kids. But in this interim phase, because they've had to leave everything behind and lose everything, they're having to start over. So they do need a boost. They do need people to come around and rally
That's
around them to
that's
help.
good.
And it's one thing to hear about it from comfort of Denver for you and the
That's
upstate of
right.
South Carolina for me. It's another thing to sit in their homes, which I got to do this past summer in the Middle East, of sitting in the homes of Syrian refugees, hearing their
Hmm.
stories. The one family that I think I was touched the most by their story. The guy we were talking to primarily was a business owner in Syria. His family they were very successfully well-educated people. His brother was an educator, a trained educator, was an educator in
Hmm.
Syria, and they had to flee. They lost their farm, they lost all their money, they lost all their possessions. But in the 2012 crisis, the Syrian war that started around 2012, I think, but that's really when the refugees leaving, I'm told. They began to cross neighboring borders to flee for their lives. And I asked him, so we hear a lot of people saying they all want to come to America. And he's like, no, that's not true. I don't want to go to America. I want to go back to Syria because Syria is my home. Yeah, that's where my family comes from. I mean, for him and his family, that's their dream, is to return. But then he said, but we have no choice. We can't go
Oh,
back.
right.
And even if the doors did reopen, which, always a possibility, we don't want to give up complete hope. He still lost everything. And
Right.
not only is he starting over which is a huge struggle because they're discriminated against where they live now. It's hard for them to find jobs where they live. That's why I say we got to separate those who come here versus those who are in neighboring countries, because in those neighboring countries, a lot of those people don't want to give jobs to the refugees. They want to give it to their own people. And if they do get hired,
Oh,
they're
right.
paid pennies on the dollar versus what a national would
Oh.
get. So
Hmm.
they're just struggling. They're struggling with in many parts of the world to get educating their kids and finding places who will accept their kids. I mean, again, not every place is the same, but there's a lot of them that are experiencing this, and they
Right.
feel discriminated against. They feel hated, unwelcome by some. But thankfully, in some places, people are welcoming them with open arms and really doing what they can to love on them, because that's really ultimately what's going to help carry them through. Yes,
That's right.
they need food, they need housing, they need all that kind of stuff. Not trying to minimize that, but on top of that,
Right.
they want to feel like they're treated as a person,
Right.
because they are image bearers of God. So they want to be treated as such, and
That's right.
not a disease that we've got to keep at arm's length.
That's right.
Because
Yeah,
if we're all honest, we know that happens. We know they get treated that way in many cases.
that's right. And unfortunately, I mean, it's of no fault of theirs, right? The refugees
Exactly.
that they're in their situation. So, I mean, it'd be one
I
thing if
doubt
they
they
were
woke up
making all
saying,
these like,
"I want
yeah,
this."
right, right. They're not. It's not like they're making all these horrible choices in their lives and have come to this point of crisis, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is no fault of theirs. And generally, Steve, these refugees, I mean, they are refugees because either the political situation changes. Sometimes it's a religious persecution, right? And they have to flee.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's that kind of stuff generally, isn't it? That they feel like because you think about it, what it would take again to leave everything that you have. I mean, this guy had a farm, and that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
That's a serious situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the Rohingya in Southeast Asia, religious persecution, uh, Syria, people fleeing because of a civil war, the current crisis in Afghanistan. There's just all kinds of reasons why people are fleeing. Lack of food is one of them. They're hungry, they're starving, they're desperate. They can't, there's a desperation, and that's the thing in the West. We often don't fully understand what it's like to live in such a desperation or desperate situation where we will do anything to try to provide for our family and to save our
Right.
family.
That's right.
I don't think most of us really understand. I don't. I can't say that I do. I don't know what it's like to, as you said, we don't know what it's like to lose our homes,
Oh, right. It's crazy to think
and
about.
not have
Yeah.
resources available to help us. I mean, I went through a period where I couldn't afford a home, but I was single. But I wasn't in a crisis necessarily looking back. Maybe in the moment I felt like it, but I had tons of people who were willing to help me, friends and family. And, I wasn't going to go homeless because I had people caring about me. I wasn't living in a country that was at war or within a civil
Right.
war or anything like that.
That's right.
So I never experienced the crisis at the level they're experiencing it.
That's right. Well, Steve, you've already kind of touched on it a little, some of the problems and struggles that are faced by, these refugees and the displaced. You'd mentioned about the hunger, sometimes just a lack of food. What other kind of main problems and struggles do many of these refugees face?
Well, I really think that they're facing now, I start over. And I know we've touched on that, but
Yeah, right.
they're not just
That'd be a
starting over.
deal.
They're facing a culture crisis, because now they're entering these places that are not their own, among people who are not their own. It's not their norm, and so they've got this kind of if you want to call it a crisis of culture or cross-cultural crisis for them, trying to figure out, how do you, as an adult with a family, how do I start over in a place that people don't understand me? And there's going to be tons of misunderstandings, cultural misunderstandings, language faux pas of them trying to learn a new language. And that's a lot of stress. I mean, you and I have
It
lived
is.
cross-culturally, but we
That's
were
right.
mentally, to some degree, prepared to experience all that I just described. Not so much starting over, but in some ways it was, but we had the backing to do it. We did it on
That's right.
purpose. We chose to do it. So,
And a lot of planning in advance, right? And a lot of
exactly. And we still
preparation.
experience
I mean, we
stress.
actually, that's right. We actually had friends in the city where we lived who actually even gotten kind of reserved an apartment for us. And yeah, it was a very different situation for sure.
Yeah, and it was stressful for us learning the language. How do you,
That's right.
for me, it was getting a surprise $600 heating bill that no one told me about was coming all at one time because I had assumed it was done a different way, and kind of just trying to figure out how am I going to put together $600 that wasn't in my budget. And
Right.
there was just going to the grocery store, and some weird stories about that, of just how learning going up with all your fruits and vegetables to the checkout line, not realize you had to get it weighed and priced before you went by some other employee, and they're
That's right.
you can't buy them because you have no clue what they're saying, and you gotta look stupid walking out the door because everybody's wondering why did and we like to say where I was at, oh, those stupid foreigners.
All right.
And we can laugh about it, but these people were thrust into it. It's not something they were planning to do, as we've already said.
Right.
And so there's a level of stress. Kids are resilient and they adjust and adapt, but they're still going to experience stress of language issues and education and all those things and so many things I'm not even coming to mind right now, that just you have to experience. I mean, the family I mentioned earlier, they don't even like their kids leaving their home. They kind of have a wall around the home that they got because it's just normal where they live. They don't even like the kids playing outside of that because they're afraid of what the locals are going to do to their kids if they're not watching.
Wow.
There's all kinds of things going on through their heads. So yeah, it's just, I think we need to have definitely a level of empathy for them and care.
Definitely.
And just not be too quick to classify them as certain types of people that they're really not, because as you've mentioned and we've talked about, they were forced.
That's right.
Through different factors, external factors that just really forced them into that life that they did not want, but they
That's right.
They had no choice.
To point out, and Steve, I'm going to also point out just quickly, because whenever we've done a couple of 2 or 3 episodes on different refugee issues, and I remember, just a side note, just so we kind of get it in there, I remember our friend Jason Lee had mentioned when he was a guest on our show, that for those that are coming to the United States, I always like to mention that, these people are some of the most vetted people anywhere on earth. And so, these are very well vetted people. So I think, especially thinking about people coming from Afghanistan and, are there going to be terrorists among some of these people? And just so overwhelmingly the answer to that is no. And what that means is if they're super well vetted, bring them in, help them. These are just people who are forced to this situation, right? And so I just remember that. I'll always remember that. I'm so glad that Jason mentioned that, because it does put a different light on these ones who do come to the United States, doesn't it? And so, so Steve, as we end our episode, let's just talk about kind of, with Afghanistan in the spotlight, how should Christians respond, not just to the overall situation in Afghanistan, but to those who are now displaced? I think you've got 3 or 4 things that those of us that are, you and those that are our viewers can be doing, kind of personally be involved, right?
Yes. So I've got 4 things here. The first one goes without saying, prayer. Say it anyways, but should go without saying.
Right. And just be praying for them, right?
Yeah, we do need to be praying, especially, if you're not around them, and obviously we can't go over there into Afghanistan, but, prayer, God is moving through it.
That's right.
There's probably tons of stories we will never hear, events that are happening that God is just working through this crisis. People like to say, well, if God is real, how could something like this happen? I think a better question if God is real and what we know about him through Scripture, why do we have so much good in our lives? I heard someone kind of compare that rather than just focusing on the bad. He's really given us so much goodness, and we live in a sinful, fallen world. So, bad things are going to happen, even though we don't want it. But prayer.
That's right.
Number 1.
Okay. Definitely.
Number 2, serve. As I mentioned, DFW area is not the only one. Virginia, Washington, D.C., I think I've read about someplace in Colorado and California and other places that are, they've already been told by the U.S. government they're going to be receiving these Afghan refugees, so begin preparing. So that's what Bob Roberts and many others in the Dow are working on at this moment. And so if you do live in one of those places, you can go to the World Relief website or contact, probably best is contact them. I don't know if they have all that information online right now, but you can contact them. I contacted the one in my local area, and they were able to tell me, if they were or not, and where. There's also the Lutheran, I forget what their exact name, the Lutheran Resettlement Services, I think is what they're called.
Okay.
I know they have some in Columbia, South Carolina. They're also resettling some of these Afghans. I know they're settling some in Houston. I think World Relief is in charge of the ones going into Dallas, I think. And the Lutheran services in Houston. I know some places in Utah are going to receive them as well. So get involved if they're there, and volunteers who are getting involved. And if you're nowhere near, but maybe you can, give some practical things. If you somehow could connect with those people and you could give something to help them out with, food and stuff. They're always needing that kind of stuff, which, comes to the giving part. That's number 3. Obviously giving to World Relief, the Lutheran Services, any of these organizations or churches in the area that are engaged, like Bob Roberts Church in Keller, Texas. They're all, they all need the money to buy things. They need, cars. And I know the government's they do give some for a short period of time to help, but it doesn't take care of everything. So other people have to step up and help. So giving, Silk Road Callus, we're also taking money but not to do things here per se, but at this point, but to do things in a neighboring country, and then a near neighboring country that has received Afghans in the past. We're already making plans because we believe they will come there. They're just not immediate since they're not bordering Afghanistan, but they're just one country in between them. So we believe they will come there. So we are raising money and preparing with our field staff to what we're going to do when they get there. So when they arrive, and this person lives in a community where these previous Afghan refugees have come to and are now living. So that's why we believe they're going to come there, because the government will naturally put them in places near their own people. So we're preparing for that today. So if you want to give to that, we're taking money for that, and we'll set it aside to serve them. And then the last thing is advocate. We need to pray, we need to give, we need to serve. But I guess you could put advocating under serving. So, but I just separated it to highlight it. Using social media, talking with your churches, getting them involved. It takes people to mobilize other people to get engaged, because there's a lot of us just roaming around, consumed by our own problems. Maybe we're not fully aware of what's really happening. Maybe we've heard a blip in the news about the crisis, or we don't, I have friends who don't watch the news and they really have no clue what's going on. So, unless you go to them and say, and answer questions, people who believe they're all illegal immigrants and they're just here to take. And, it takes advocates to help educate them, to help show them that those things are not true. And you know what? 80 million refugees, you could find a couple of people who are going to fall into that category. No question.
I mean, we sure think so. Yeah.
Yeah. But if you want to cherry pick a few examples, that's fine. But there's so many more examples. They were just people who came, they got assistance, and then they landed on their feet, and they were able to care for their families, work for their money, and pay their own. I mean, even where I live, we've got refugees, people who were refugees when they came. They own very successful businesses in our community.
That's great, isn't it?
Talking 6-figure salaries, if not 7. And they were here as refugees. So, people like that are contributing to our society. So, we need to advocate truth and not advocate for sound bites. And so
Right. That's good.
I just encourage you to get
That's
out there
good.
and advocate, specifically in your churches, to
That's
pray for
right.
them and to get involved somehow in some way.
Well, Steve, as you mentioned these ways that we can be involved, I kept thinking that what an awesome opportunity for our churches, right, to be able to be involved in one form or another. I mean, I can't think of another ministry opportunity for our churches
Hmm.
in terms of, helping the refugees coming that could just produce such fantastic fruit, because you've got these refugees who are displaced, are at a very low point in their lives, and to be able to go, hey, we love you, we want to help you, would just be a real ministry opportunity. And it's almost like, yeah, that's a big no-brainer, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think if we could look at them as image bearers of God, the same that we are, created in God's image, and that's, I know it's a little bit cliche-ish here in America, but what would Jesus do?
All right.
What would he do? Would he be
What
more,
will they do?
would he sit there be fighting as his priority of security, or would he be up there on the
No.
front line saying, I'm here to serve you. I'm here to
Yes,
help you
he
because I
would do
don't,
that. Yeah.
I don't understand what you're. I'm not saying those other things aren't important, but I think our first response as believers should be serving those who are in need, serving those who are coming out of a crisis, and not judging and labeling them inappropriately, but really wrapping our arms around them and saying, what can I do to help?
That's right. That's great. Well, Steve, thanks for walking us through all of that. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I would just encourage everyone to, call World Relief, and the Lutheran ministry that Steve had mentioned. Steve, we can have those, those links even in our show notes, which would help people, get in touch with those folks. And, these are people who need us, but they need Jesus really at a time when, they're at their lowest. So, Steve, any final words from you?
Pray, serve, give, and advocate. I'll leave it with that.
That's right. That's very good. Well, great. Okay, church, we've given you some opportunities to be involved. We look forward to seeing how that, how you take action on that. Looking forward to the stories. Be sure to with us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/missions talk. We'd love to hear those stories. We'd love to hear, how you did get involved. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you with us on the next episode of Missions Talk.